Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the Lunchtime Learning webinar series. My name is Brendan Woodruff. I'm the co-chair of the Green New York Operations and Engagement Subcommittee, and I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to join us here today for a topic that I think we've all been indulging in a little bit more these past couple months. A couple housekeeping notes before we get started today. Everybody is on mute as you join. If you do have questions, please type them into the chat box. If you have any questions, we'll get to them at the end, but type them in as you think of them, and then we'll get to them at the end of today's presentation. In addition, this webinar is being recorded, and it is put up on the Green New York website afterwards, so you are able to find it. If there's a slide you want to go back and see, or if you want to share it with any of your coworkers who couldn't be here today as well. We also have a full library of webinars recorded up on the website as well. We're also very excited to announce that we have the next 6 months of topics up on the Green New York website. We have some really good ones for you. Next month is going to be sustainable clothing. Then we're going to have sustainable outdoor recreation in December. We're going to have avoiding greenwashing in January. In February, we're doing sustainable brewing. In March, we've got zero emission lawn equipment. And in April, we're doing sustainable outdoor recreation for the summer as well. So really good lineup coming up. And without further ado, I'd like to get into introduce today's presenter. Beth Meir is going to be talking about our topic today, sustainable takeout. Beth has been with DEC for 12 years now, leading our state agency sustainability and green procurement program. She's done a ton of work on you name the product. She's done a deep dive into it and all of the environmental impacts. So we're really excited to have her sharing her knowledge of that here today. And congratulations on her being recently retired, but still joining us to share that knowledge, which I think kind of speaks to, kind of Beth's character and always, doing the work and making sure that, everybody has what they need. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Beth.
Thanks, Brendan. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah, we're good to go.
Fantastic. So my apologies to the vegans and vegetarians out there, but I am myself a big fan of Renaissance fairs, and when I was thinking about the lack of containers in certain takeout situations, that's what struck my mind. So hope you can enjoy the humor there. My work in this area comes from my work for the last 12 years on green procurement for New York State. And though, this webinar is really for more the consumer, I'm going to try not to wonk you out too much. So I'll try to, bring it down to a little less detailed level. But in 2018, New York State finalized a green specification on food containers and wrappers that applies to purchases by agencies across the state. And there's a lot in here to ponder. The link is there. There's a link to our website at the top, and then this is a live link here on the food service spec. So if you want to dive deeper after today's presentation, please do. I'm just moving this slide. There we go. Good. So this slide, this is my presentation in a nutshell. This is the most important slide in the deck. It's sort of a summary of everything. And the rest of my presentation is going to go into this in some detail. But the specification that I just spoke about sets up a hierarchy. And we don't talk a lot about avoiding container use altogether in the spec because it's more of a purchasing kind of spec. But this is generally the hierarchy, and it fits the hierarchy for waste in New York State. Reduce first, reuse where possible, compost, which is really a form of recycling, but here it's sort of above, and I'll be going into detail about why recycling, and then recycling. And so this is just a summary slide, and now we're going to take a deeper dive into each of these areas. Okay, reduce. So just say no to certain things. And, there's a certain number of agencies are working on this. The Parks Department, the Office of State Parks and Recreation, has a great single-use plastic reduction policy internal for their vendors, and they have asked them to stop the use of portion cups. There's a great picture of a portion cup that's actually polystyrene. We're going to talk about polystyrene more. Just not give out stirrers, not give out straws unless asked. And then there's things like sauce packages and plastic bags. When you're at the restaurant, just try to say no to stuff like that. And a lot of times you don't need it, and it's possible to do that. And, Jody and Brendan and a lot of other folks have really pushed this envelope pretty far, and it would be great to have them comment on that at the end of the presentation. So reducing upfront is really important, and there's great ways to do that. Reuse. So here for reuse, and, this is a little hard to get yourself to do this, but you can bring your own. This is a photograph, actually, of Brendan's. He brings his kit along with his spoon and his fork and his knife and his straw. That's a straw there and the straw cleaner and everything. It fits in a little handy bag. So bring your own utensils if you're going to be eating out, like at a picnic or, picking up something and eating a picnic, or if you're going to be eating outdoors at a restaurant, for example. Just bring your own utensils. You can bring your own napkin. You can bring your own container. So if you're going to a restaurant, indoors or outdoors, and you're planning to take home food after you eat, you can definitely bring your own container and fill it at the table. I mean, it takes some organization to do this. I think Jody Smith-Anderson, who's on the call, is one of the people I really admire because she really gets her act together to do this. But you can. Now, giving them your container to fill, say, in the kitchen, if you're just picking up takeout, is probably a little bit of an issue. And certainly because of COVID, it's more so. But right before COVID, there was at least one restaurant in New York City, a restaurant called Just Salad, that had gotten permission to fill their customers' containers. So I think that this is actually something that's going to happen more in the future, and I'm sure there's a lot of issues around it, but it will become more acceptable. And then, of course, bring your own bag to carry the items. And you might even be able to tell them up front when you're making the order that you're going to be bringing your own bag. It's possible. I mean, sometimes that's hard for them because they have to organize stuff. But be creative about reuse. And I think we can hear from some folks on this call about how they make that work for them later. So then the third option in the hierarchy is to compost. And why do I care so much about composting? And I'm just going to toggle back and forth a bit between this slide and the next slide, because a lot of folks are concerned that, hey, I'm buying or I'm asking my restaurant to buy this compostable ware, but will it really be composted? Well, one of the problems with paper that could be composted or could be recycled is that if you put food on it and it gets stained, then it's hard to recycle. And again, I'm not an absolute expert on this, but there's a certain degree to which, like a greasy pizza box is not that recyclable. But it could be compostable if it's going to a commercial composting facility. So there's items that you can compost at home, and there's items that you can compost in a commercial facility. When a commercial facility is available, I just want to say it's amazing. And the little story I want to tell is that back in the day, before 2 or 3 years ago, when we instituted a commercial composting program in our building at 625 Broadway in Albany, I was one of the volunteers that took home a small bucket of compost material, 2, maybe 3, but mostly about twice a week from our floor. So this whole floor of people, which is a few hundred people, would fill up a little bucket that was the size of like a small bucket, not the size of a home compost bucket, but maybe a little bit bigger than that, but not that large, and that was it. So twice a week that would fill up. Now on that same floor, we fill a whole-size garbage can every day, and that is going to a commercial composting facility. And anything that's soiled, anything that's touched food, just goes right into that if it's compostable, and so it's really cut back our waste generation. So I highly recommend compostability. The other thing to think about with compostability is the litter factor. And I didn't put that on a slide. I thought about it later, but it's really true. One of the problems with plastics, as we all know, is that when they're not disposed of properly and they get into the environment, they are a ubiquitous contaminant, and especially styrofoam, but other things too. And there's the Pacific Gyre and these places in the ocean, they're just filled with plastic. And we want to avoid that. So at least with a compostable item, even if it's not going to compost really fast, like within a few months, it's going to break down over the course of a year, or maybe for a fork. It might take a little longer, Gary probably knows, but it's not going to be there forever, which is what a plastic will do. So I'm just going to toggle back to the slide previous to talk about a few of the items that are compostable. So in some senses, this untreated paper, my little picture here, I love this little shot of someone who drew on it, is really the best option because it's completely untreated. It's totally compostable. It would be recyclable if it wasn't stained with food. And it doesn't have a great deal of extra manufacturing to it. It's inexpensive. It's a great option. But we did get a little fancier with paper plates in recent times. And so there's a coated paper. I don't have a picture of it, but it's actually coated with clay. It's the kind of paper that has a pattern on it, or some kind of shiny. It can be all a certain color. I'm thinking of one that's red, but they're all different colors. That's clay. It's very safe. It's compostable. It's great. And then there's coated paper with wax, and a lot of those are like little cups. Like I had one in my house. It was like a little single-service cup that my mom bought him a long time ago. I think my mom, really dating myself here, used to have a little set of these in the bathroom all the time. Those are wax-coated, and they're also very good, very natural, don't have any contaminants in them. And then there's coated paper, which is made of PLA, which is compostable. It's a polylactic acid. It's completely compostable. But it is, more manufactured and things like that. And so I'm going to jump down to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the concerns with PLA. Just going to move down here. Okay. Oh, and just to go back to my other slide here, I talk about the paper and the untreated and everything. These are pictures. I went to visit the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency food waste composting facility near Syracuse, and it is quite an operation. And they bring in a lot of food there. It's very exciting. So I just wanted to give them a shout-out, a fantastic organization. And the place where our stuff goes in Ulster County, the composting facility where the stuff from 625 Broadway goes, is the Ulster County Resource Recovery Agency. Those two facilities right now are the only two commercial composting facilities that accept ware in New York State. So we don't have great capacity yet, but it is a market, and we're going to be building that market and hopefully expanding that market. So there is a sort of chicken and egg problem here, but I am still a fan of compostable materials, and I'll get to the concerns I have about a few of them right here. So polylactic acid is made from plant-based materials. It's biodegradable. You do need to make sure it's certified as biodegradable, and I'm going to talk about the certification programs in a second. But it does have to be manufactured. It's got some intensive manufacturing to make a plastic, and it adds a step to the fabrication of the item. So here is a great takeout container. I think I picked this up at the Honest Weight Food Co-op in Albany, and they do a really good job sourcing green things. But if you look at it, it's going to take at least 3 steps to make. You have to make the paper, you have to coat it with the plastic, and then you have to fold it into this shape. So it's going to be on the slightly more expensive side in the grand scheme of things. It adds a step to fabrication to create that surface. And you can see in the photograph it's a little shiny. When you look at something like that, a box like that, they're not all coated with PLA. They're going to be a little shinier. But the problem here, too, is that it can contaminate the recycling stream if you put it into paper recycling. The PLA itself will gum up the works, and people like Gary know exactly how that works better than I do, but it kind of can be an issue. So the PLA, while it's a great thing and a wonderful thing, it does have its certain considerations to think about. Now, molded fiber is the other thing that I did a very deep dive on, and what are the concerns there? So in this photograph, it's hard to see. It looks just like a plastic clamshell, but it is not. It's got that little rough edge up in the corner there. It's actually, it feels like paper. It feels like, and there's a lot of things you can tell. You just look at it. It's molded in one piece. It's got a one-step process. So you make a slurry of the plant-based material. It can be a lot of different things, and you extrude it into that shape, and you are done. So this stuff is really inexpensive. But the problem is that because it's so fibrous and it's very easy for stuff to run through it, the manufacturers added materials to it, chemicals that would keep it from having the lunch land up on your plate in about a second flat. So it's got this chemical in it that gives it grease resistance and water resistance, and that in the past has been perfluorinated chemicals. More than 7 or 8 years ago, it was a long-chain perfluorinated chemical called PFOA that some of you might be familiar with. It contaminated the water in Hoosick Falls, New York. But in recent times, they switched over to short-chain fluorinated chemicals, PFAS. And we're now realizing that PFAS itself is a problem. It's very persistent in the environment. It might not be, it's probably as persistent as plastic. It's very mobile in water, so it could contaminate water supplies easily. And it might be as toxic as the longer chain chemicals. And that's a concern. We don't know that for sure yet, but if it is, then we may have done a regrettable substitution, and we may end up with something that is still going to be contaminating our water supplies in the future. So New York State had a specification that actually had compostable ware at the top of its hierarchy, and we redid that to make sure that they would be avoiding anything with PFAS in it and to make reusable as the top of the hierarchy. We tested our containers in 2016. Every single thing that was a molded fiber offering had high levels of fluorine in it, indicating the presence of short-chain PFAS. But there is no fluorine in these untreated paper products or clay products or wax products or the PLA-coated paper because it's not necessary for stain and grease resistance. So the market is shifting. I'm really happy to say we've got a lot of new PFAS-free molded fiber products available on state contract. We also have this great certification program. The Biodegradable Plastics Institute has required since the beginning of this year that anything they certify has to be PFAS-free. So if you look for that certification, you know it will be PFAS-free. The Compost Manufacturing Alliance, which is CMA, and I've given you the links here for these guys, they also are going to be requiring that nothing has added fluorine in it, the PFAS, by January 1st, 2021. Right now they're requiring testing, but by 2021 that will be gone. So if they're certified there, they're PFAS-free. You can also look, it's a great resource on the Environmental Health, the Center for Environmental Health website. I've given you the link there that has all the products that they have tested that are low in fluorine. And so you can look at the different paper products and the wax-coated and the clay-coated and also a whole bunch of molded fiber. This molded fiber tray is now on state contract. That's really important, and it is PFAS-free. So I'm very happy with what our state purchasing program has been able to do in helping to shift the market toward PFAS-free products. And our fourth item on our hierarchy is recycling. And here, there's some good plastics and some bad plastics. The best plastic out there, and I hope I'm not talking too far out of school, but I have talked to some experts on this, is polypropylene. It is highly recyclable. It's good for hot and cold food. I personally love this takeout container that I get at a lot of different restaurants. I use it as my Tupperware at home. I don't microwave in it just for plastics. I mean, plastics are not the cleanest thing on the planet, but if you want to go to the NGO scorecard, I think I have that next. Yeah, I'll have that next thing. I'm going to jump to that in a second. We'll talk about that, how to know which plastics are more and less toxic. My second hierarchy on this one is PET. PET is okay. It's a little more toxic than polypropylene, and it really can only be used for colder items. There are restaurants, like a local restaurant for us, that puts hotter things in there. It kind of warps it a little bit. It's probably sucking a little bit of the toxics out of it, but it's great for salads and things like that. So PET is great. Polystyrene is the real problem. And I love this phrase, nix the six. We do not like polystyrene, and here is why. Get my next slide. Here we go. Why avoid polystyrene? Styrene itself is reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. It is not necessarily available to you when you're eating food on a polystyrene item, but it is an issue in manufacturing, exposures to workers, exposures to the environment. Polystyrene itself is very slow to degrade. It's extremely common in litter, and it's not really feasible to recycle it, not economically and not technically. It tends to break into little pieces, especially the foam. The pictures I have here, though, for you are not of the foam. I think everyone can recognize them. It's more the polystyrene that is not foam. It still is very fragile. It breaks up. It cracks. It's not a good idea, and it's just as toxic as the foam is. It's just they just don't blow air into it. So I recommend going to the BizNGO Plastic Scorecard for more information on the toxicity of plastics, and there's the link there. And it'll show you how polypropylene is one of the better ones. PLA is a little cleaner than polypropylene, which is a great thing. So the bottom line, as we come to the end, there are no silver bullets Nothing is easy. I'm sorry. Green procurement is a lot of gray, but we do know some things about what's good and what's bad. You can eat the deep-fried Oreos as much as you want at the State Fair, but I don't recommend them eating them every day. If you can reduce the amount of take-home, takeout containers that you pick up by saying no to straws and things like that, that's going to really help. Where you can bring your own container, you can avoid it altogether. And where you can't, you can be talking to folks, especially if they're around the Syracuse area or the Albany area. Try to get folks to switch to compostables, and people may be able to use that commercial composting facilities that are around us. And for a small, for just a regular compost pile in your backyard, you can compost paper plates and other smaller things. I've done that myself. So that's the end, and we can switch to questions. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. That was fantastic. And you got me thinking there about a couple things that I wanted to mention to folks here. The first is you mentioned a little bit about talking to the restaurants themselves. I think that's a really good idea. I think that customer pressure is a way to get folks to think more about this. So if you do have a favorite takeout place, don't feel bashful to talk to them if they are using, a polystyrene type container or something like that, and let them know that the customers are looking for something that's a little bit more environmentally friendly. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well is when you are choosing a restaurant, you can look for the Green Restaurant Association has a certification program that's pretty strong that looks at how sustainable the overall operations of a restaurant are. So that's something to look for as well. It's called the Green Restaurant Association. You can go on their website. They've got a number of different places where you can search for restaurants in your area and stuff like that. And that's another ask that you can make to the restaurants as well. And anytime I've talked to a local business, I've never really gotten a lot of pushback. They're thankful. And a lot of them just don't think about this on a daily basis, especially nowadays with how hard the business environment is. They don't have the time to get into the weeds about their takeout containers and their other stuff. So being able to share information with them helps them as well as helping the environment as well. And even when it comes to just refusing stuff, I've never really gotten much pushback or anything like that. So a lot of times, employees are just trained to hand you the extra napkins or the straw, and that's considered, hospitable. And that's good hospitality and good customer service. But in reality, if we don't need those items, they just end up being waste and litter. So, never feel bad about, choosing to refuse, as they say. And with that, we'll get into some of the questions here. So are the dyes in paper products a concern for composting?
I've never researched that, and I haven't heard about that, but certainly dyes can be an issue. So
we do have Gary here, if you want me to bring him in. Yep, Gary, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. The question was about dyes?
Yes.
Yeah, so in paper products, the dyes are soy-based, so that's not an issue.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
Sure, at least the ones manufactured in this country.
And let's take a look here for the next questions. And again, folks, if you do have questions, feel free to type them into the chat box here. We've gotten a couple questions about recordings and links. The recording will be on the Green New York website. If you would like the links, feel free to send me an email. It's brendan.woodruff@dec.ny.gov, and I'll make sure to follow up with you with the links. So looking at the next thing here, can plastic utensils be recycled? Also, are restaurants offering more packets for condiments due to COVID?
Wow, plastic utensils. I don't know the answer, but I don't think they can. That's Gary. I'm gonna default to Gary again.
Yep. Gary, okay. Are you there?
Yep, and I'm happy to participate. Great job, by the way, Beth and Brendan. So no, they're not. They're not recyclable, and it mostly has to do with the fact that plastic utensils tend to fall through the grates at the in the facilities, the recycling facilities that take all this stuff. So even if it was separated out, it's hard to recycle because it's just too thin and small to be captured.
So Gary, I have a question for you then. So the ware, I think of utensils as ware more than I do of containers. Sorry, but like a fork that is made of PLA, which is the you can sort of tell that's compostable. That is certainly not recyclable, and it's hard to compost. I know it's even hard for the commercial facilities, but is it a better option because then if it is like litter, it will eventually degrade? Like, what's your feeling about that?
I mean, paper degrades faster, but if it's a choice between PLA plastic and regular plastic and they're both going to a landfill, then yeah, the PLA plastic will certainly break down faster. It'll still take years in a landfill, though.
And then the second part of that question here is, are restaurants offering more packets for condiments due to COVID? I have certainly noticed that, especially because of the fact that, they don't want people touching multiple surfaces like with a large pump bottle, which is what we had been seeing places switching to, away from the packets. And also, especially with takeout, a lot of times you end up with just a handful of ketchup packets or hot sauce packets or something. And another part of that question is asking if there's any requirements about packets. I'm not sure about that, but I do know I've seen a lot more condiment packets going out the door.
Oh, you mean whether or not the health department is requiring them to use it? I don't know that either.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. Next question here.
I had a little tip while you're doing that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Note to myself that I was going to mention is that the plastic bag ban in New York State exempts restaurant takeout. So it does matter for you guys to think about how to avoid the bag at the restaurants because they are not required to avoid it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of those things, too. A lot of times when you go to pick up the takeout, they've already put it in a bag because they have them lined up on the counter or something. So you're going to want to make sure that you mention that, right up front, as Beth said earlier. The other thing, too, is if you're ordering online through one of the apps, a lot of times there's a button that you can click that says, I don't need utensils and other stuff. Always make sure to click that, especially if you're taking it home or you have your own things with you. I know that a lot of times, as I mentioned before, restaurants give out a ton of stuff because no one wants to be out on a picnic and run out of napkins or, break their fork or something. But, it does end up as a lot of waste that there's not much we can do with. So look for that section in the app where you can click that button saying you don't need utensils. And if you do call, make sure that you let them know you have everything. So the next question we've got here is, what are your thoughts on the use of durable returnable takeout caners? Customers leave a returnable deposit. Is that a viable model?
Oh. Wow. I think that sounds really cool. I mean, I think it would probably be more viable for a place that you use all the time. Like I'm thinking like if you have an office and you're going to a lunch place and you're doing that fairly frequently, that could work really well. But that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I've seen a couple versions of this. Up in Montreal, there's a series of coffee shops that have basically you go in you pay like a $5 deposit on the mug, and then if you bring it back, they just take it, and then they give you a fresh mug, and your deposit stays there. Whenever you want to end, you then give them the mug, you don't get another coffee, and they give you your $5 back, and you can take it to any number of different coffee shops because they're all in the same system. They'll just take the cup, they wash it in the back, and then they have the fresh cups that they give to folks who brought one in. So it's been tried. I know some places, there's some food trucks in Portland also that are working on, they have a centralized container system where you pay the deposit, you get it, you bring the container back, you get a token, go get your food, you hand them the token, and they'll give you a reusable container. So it's getting there. I think a lot of that is scale and making sure that you have a number of different places that are participating. But there's pilots out there, and it's kind of exciting. So hopefully that type of thing can scale up. So here's another question for you, Beth. From a cost perspective, is it significantly more costly, particularly for small businesses, to switch to the greener takeout containers?
Well, not the compostable molded fiber. It's very inexpensive. It's definitely competitive with polystyrene. Polystyrene is also very inexpensive because it's that one-step mold. I do think that the Chinese takeout model that I showed you can be slightly more expensive, and I don't know about the polypropylene exactly, but it's two pieces, so I would guess it might be slightly more expensive. So that's one of the reasons why it was so important for us to try to get the market for the molded fiber less expensive. So I don't know the bottom line. It's a matter of, percentage of pennies here. And one of the things that changes, too, that I've really learned in green procurement is the more people who ask for it, the more the market is demanding it, the lower the price gets. Price is actually a very elastic thing. And I think that the more that this is asked for by consumers, the more the price will go down. So, yeah, I don't think that there is some price difference, but hopefully it will also get less over time.
Mm-hmm. So another question here. All the types of plastic are a bit overwhelming to remember. Is there a reference site that people can check out that has that information on it, or any kind of a reference sheet for the different types of plastic?
Go to that plastics footprint, the link I have there for those guys. It's amazing. It's a little chart. It has a little foot on it, actually, for each of the kinds of plastics, and it shows how they relate to each other. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's fantastic.
And what was the name of that again?
Yeah, it's the, I'm looking at my notes, too, and it's in my slides. I don't know why it's escaping me, but it's the plastics footprint. So you can Google plastics footprint, and it'll come up, but it's clean production action and plastics footprint.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so is it all, yep.
Biz NGO, it's a branch of clean production action. Sorry, that was the name. It was escaping me.
Mm-hmm. Is it all right to compost food-contaminated paper products in your home composting bin?
Yeah, Gary, I don't think there's any issue there. That's a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah, it might take a little bit longer than some of the other things, but it'll compost, and if it's something that you could rip up into smaller pieces, it'll compost even faster.
Mm-hmm. Are any of the restaurant plastic containers actually being recycled today in most streams?
Oh, yeah. Polypropylene is highly recycled. Gary should weigh in, but I've heard from my own personal recycling expert, Risa Domino, that polypropylene has a very strong market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, basically polypropylene, I agree, and also polyethylene terephthalate, the number ones, have a very strong market for recycling too.
Yeah, so the two that were on the slide as the highest recommended, those are both have good markets now.
Mm-hmm. Just taking a look at some of the other questions here.
It looks like, Brendan, people want this slide deck, sent to them. I don't know if you have a way of doing that because this is a PDF, so they can't actually use the hot links. But if there's a way for us to provide that to folks, it would be great.
Yeah, so if anybody would like a list of the links, feel free to email me afterwards. I'll type it into the chat as well, but it's brendan.woodruff@dec.ny.gov, and I'll make sure to get that over to you. So some questions for Gary here involving composting. How can I convince my family to start composting? They've heard that it's gross.
It's really hard, I have to say, to get family members to do it. I honestly, if you can do it without them knowing, and then tell them that, look, we've already been doing it, and you just didn't know because you've hidden the container under the cabinet or something. That's a tough one. We all have personal preferences, and it varies amongst family members.
And one more here for you. Would composting at home attract squirrels or other small animals?
Yes, it certainly will. And you can really limit that by just covering it with browns, leaves, and other straw so that the food scraps are buried.
And we had somebody who made a comment here saying that at their transfer station in Ulster County, they don't accept black plastic. And that's a good point for us to talk about a little bit, is that the recycling, what's accepted varies by jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So what you're going to want to do, especially with the takeout containers, is once you've cleaned and drained them, take a look at what the number is inside the little recycling symbol, and then you're going to want to check with either your hauler or your municipality to see if they accept that. And unfortunately, it is a bit confusing, but definitely check with your municipality and check with what the number is there, and you'll be able to see if they accept it. Just taking a look. If anybody does have any final questions or comments, feel free to type them into the chat box. Just taking a look at anything. Beth, while I'm looking through this, do you have any final thoughts to share with folks?
I was just going to ask Gary if you could comment briefly on the black plastic, because I was told that the polypropylene is really compostable, but some of it is black. Is there an issue with that, Gary?
Yeah, some recyclers don't want the black plastic because the market for it is much more limited, and that's all I know about it.
So reuse it, or give it to me. I'm constantly losing my underwear. No, okay.
So we've had a couple comments come in regarding businesses that have switched more towards plastics and other types of disposables due to COVID. And I think the biggest thing that can be done on that front is just having a conversation with the business, or if it's a section of a business, like a bakery section or a deli or anything like that, seeing why they made the change, and then, letting them know that you want them to choose the more sustainable option. So that's going to be what you're going to want to do. And again, I mean, I've never really gotten much pushback from a business. They've generally been pretty thankful, especially if you can provide them with information or links or stuff like that and let them know that people are paying attention. Unfortunately, COVID has put us in a situation where we need to be much more cautious, much more careful, and, we're learning what works and what doesn't work as we kind of go along. No one's experienced this before, but letting the businesses know that you appreciate what they're doing sustainability-wise and that you want them to be greener, they'll find a way to do it.
Hey, Brendan, can I take another shot at that question about how do you convince your family members that it's not gross to compost?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So, when we put stuff in the garbage, it could stay there for multiple days, and you could argue that that's gross and could start to smell. And if you took it out to your compost pile on a regular basis, 2-3 times a week, it's going to be less odors and less gross probably than your own garbage bin.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. Anyone we've talked to, as Gary mentioned, that's the first thing that you get is it's gross, but after they've seen it in action, and if it's done right, most people don't even notice it's happening. So here's a good question, and this is one that once you start looking at this stuff, your mind kind of changes around it because you start noticing what type of plastic. Is it PLA? Is it compostable? Am I in a municipality where it's compostable? You really go down a rabbit hole, and that's pretty much what we do on a lot of stuff. But the question that came in is, why do restaurants, especially fast food ones, give out biodegradable plastic cups in areas where where there isn't commercial composting? Wouldn't it be better to still give out recyclable cups instead?
I don't know. I mean, recyclable paper here is both compostable and recyclable. And a cup is okay, like if it's water or something, if it's going to be contaminated by food. I have to say that for myself anyway, it's a tough call. I think if someone's already using a recyclable plastic and like a restaurant, I wouldn't really take the effort to try to change them to a compostable item if there's no local composting available. But on the other hand, especially in venues like at parks or things like that, where there's a lot of potential for litter, I think the compostables are better even if they're not going to a composting facility. But that's just me. I want Gary to chime in.
Yeah, I think it's a tough answer, and also, of course, it depends on the whole life cycle analysis. What are all the costs environmental costs of manufacturing these products and shipping them, etc. So it's not just the disposal. But, if you have food-contaminated food serviceware, you can't recycle it. So composting is the only option in that case. And I would say one other thing, even though Beth said that there's only a few compost facilities in the state that take this stuff, just because they're not in your location doesn't mean that your local compost hauler wouldn't get it to a location where it can be composted, just like they do in Albany. Ours go down to Kingston. And you could argue that that's a big footprint, but there's a lot of compostables going down to Kingston, and it's only once a week. I'll stop there.
And I just saw that Shane Brock put in a comment about convincing your family members, and I liked it because I'm a gardener too. It's that compost is really a great thing for your garden. So the more that you can compost, the better you are. And if you have a garden and you're not composting yet, you are going to be amazed at what it does for your soil.
So we've got another question here that came in that I think is a good one because I end up with this one frequently is, how recyclable are aluminum food containers? Like if you're thinking about something you might get, like an eggplant parmen or something like that.
Gary, I think they're pretty recyclable now.
The question was what now, Brendan?
How recyclable are aluminum food containers, like what you might get like an eggplant parm or something like that in?
They're recyclable. In talking to a recycling facility manager a while ago, he said a lot of that really thin aluminum, it's hard for them to reclaim because some of it just, through the high heat of the recycling, it just goes up the stack. But it's not a contaminant for them, so it's not a negative. And if you have it dense enough, compacted, like think of a giant aluminum ball, it should be more recyclable. So you just kind of smush it up. It's clean first.
Yep. And cleaning is the bit. I always it's a pain to get the burned cheese off the sides of it that you're not able to eat. But yes, make sure that you clean them all. So Gary, another one here is, do you have any recommendations about multi-unit settings? If there's any ways to get composting allowed in the building, or anything that folks that are renting can do?
Right. Well, you could start your own worm compost bin, and you could find out how to do that. Lots of resources online to start a worm compost bin, which you could do inside. It's the only kind of composting I know that you could do inside. If that's not your bag, having a bunch of worms in a bin, then you could talk to your apartment manager. I tried to do that when I lived in an apartment and I got nowhere. But if your apartment manager or owner is more green, it's possible that they'll set up a bin outside for residents to use. It has happened before.
And depending on where you are, there's some places that do residential composting pickup. So here in Albany, there is one, and actually the building that I live in, a couple people do have a subscription to them. You do usually have to pay for that, but they'll give you a little green bin or another type of bin, and then you just fill it and put it out, one day a week, and they'll come by and pick it up. So in some places that is an option, but again, it might entail talking to the landlord to make sure that they don't have any problems with you leaving that out once a week or something like that.
Thanks for bringing that up, Brendan. And we have I'm going to try to put something in the chat box that's a link to drop-off sites, communities where you could drop off food scraps for composting.
Yes, that's a great point, too. There's a lot of farmers markets. Shireen just mentioned this in the chat. A lot of farmers markets nowadays have composting drop-offs as well, and that gets back to the gardening, too, because it helps the farmers. So I'm just going to do one more search for questions here. So if you have any final ones, get them in the chat box here. So somebody here, Gary, this is another one for you, started an indoor composting bin, but they had some issues with the worms escaping. Do you have any recommendations of how to keep the worms in the bin?
Probably too detailed a conversation, and they can email me that question. I'll put my email in the chat box.
You know, I'm really thinking, and I know that Gary has done some webinars on this, but we might want to send folks, if we can, Brendan, not only the slide deck from today, but something from Gary on composting, because it's great to have all these questions on home composting. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and Gary actually did a full lunchtime learning webinar on composting, which is up on the Green New York website. So there's a lot of good tips there as well, and you can go through and watch the recording of that. And that should give you kind of the basics of how to get started.
Oh, great. So it's on the public-facing website. That's fantastic. So we have the link to that. Yeah, great.
Yep. So I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So Beth or Gary, any final thoughts to leave people with?
Be kind to yourself. Don't feel guilty. Enjoy life and do the best you can.
It's a journey.
Yeah, I'll third that. I completely agree. I mean, the photo that we have up there right now, you know, it's a slushie that has it's in a plastic cup, unfortunately, because it's takeout. But you know, you've got the straw, so you know, do what you can. And you know, this is especially one area where that's important. So I'd like to thank everybody for jumping on today, and thank you very much to Beth for presenting today. Thank you for Gary for helping out with a lot of our questions. I think we covered a lot of really good ground. And again, a recording of this will be up on the Green New York website, and feel free to email me if you'd like a copy of the slides and the link. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one.
Thanks, Brendan.